Today we will learn about respiration, the basic mechanism, muscles involved in it, and various pressures related to respirations, and the various pulmonary function tests that are very much important in clinical physiology and the clinical conditions related to them. Before going to respiration, we must know a basic about the respiratory tract. Anatomically, the respiratory tract can be divided into upper respiratory tract, that is from nose to upper part of the vocal folds, and from lower part of the vocal folds to alveoli of lungs is known as the lower respiratory tract. In the context of physiology, physiological division or the division on the basis of the functions of a specific portion of respiratory passages or tract is more important, and on that basis it's divided into two zones: conducting zone and respiratory zone. Conducting zone means that portions of the respiratory passage or respiratory tract where there is only the conduction of air, no actual gaseous exchange takes place here. Gaseous exchange means the exchange of gases in the alveoli and the blood, and the portions of the respiratory passage where the actual gaseous exchange takes place is known as the respiratory zone. So the conducting zone extends from nose to terminal bronchiole, and as in this place no gaseous exchange takes place, this is called dead space in the context of respiration. And in respiratory zone there is actual respiration taking place. This is a diagram or picture showing the conducting passages, and the conducting passages means upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract, where the upper respiratory tract, that is from nasal cavity to the larynx, it is the upper respiratory tract, and the conducting zone where the actually only the conduction of air is taking place extends from nose to terminal bronchiole, that is the whole portion of upper respiratory tract, and some portion of lower respiratory tract is also included in the dead space or in the conducting zone. And from the terminal bronchiole up to the alveoli of lungs where the actual gaseous exchange is taking place is termed as the respiratory zone. And anatomically it consists extends from the vocal fold or trachea, primary bronchi, and the lungs. That means the portions of respiratory tract where the gaseous exchange taking place, we know this collectively this portion is called respiratory unit, because in all of these portions respiration is taking place, and that's why it's called the respiratory zone or the respiratory unit. Now the functions of respiratory tract. As the tract itself is known as respiratory tract, so obviously the main function of this tract is to respirate, or means gaseous exchange of air, that the air that is coming from the environment into the alveoli by inspiration that supply oxygen to our blood, and then when the tissue of the body utilize this oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide aside from ATP and water, which has to be eliminated from the body. So this is the respiratory function of respiratory tract. And the respiratory tract also have some non-respiratory functions aside from the gaseous exchange. The first function is filtration function, as you can see here. We have previously described that the conducting zone or the dead space has no role in the respiration or gaseous exchange. So this doesn't necessarily means that they don't serve any purpose. They have their own important functions, and these functions is called comparatively called conditioning of the air. That means the air that we inhale during inspiration from our environment is a raw air. That means this air has some microparticles that can be very harmful if they reach our lower respiratory tract, that means the alveoli, which are very much delicate structure. So they must have to be removed before they can enter into our lower respiratory tract. Also, the air that enters into our body during inspiration has much more lower temperature in comparison to our body temperature, and they have less water content, which means this air is dry, environmental air is dry, so they must have to be humidified means addition of water to this air. So in this process, from our body we add temperature and water content to the inspired environmental air, and that's how the warming and humidification of the air taking place. And these three functions together, filtration function, warming and humidification of the air together, is called conditioning of the air. So this conditioning of the air is taking place in the upper respiratory tract or conducting zone, or in the dead space. So this is the function of the dead space or conducting zone. And another important function is phonation. That means the pronunciation of words, it helps in speech by vocalization. It also has some important functions of olfaction, because olfactory receptors are present in the olfactory mucosa of the nose. And another important function is immunity. As you all know that the blood monocyte, when it reaches to the tissue, it is termed as macrophage, and depending on which tissue they are present, they are termed as the different types of macrophage. The macrophage or monocyte that is present in the alveolus are known as alveolar macrophage, which protects the alveolus or our respiratory tract from various harmful environmental substances that may enter through the inspiration. And they also have got some metabolic functions, and very important is that conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. We all have known already in our cardiovascular system that this angiotensin 2 has got some very important function in regulation of blood pressure through the renin-angiotensin system or renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So this renin, we already know that it comes from the kidney juxtaglomerular apparatus, and then it produces angiotensinogen, and this angiotensinogen ultimately produces angiotensin 1. But ultimately the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2 must have to take place in the alveolus, because for this conversion to take place, the enzyme that is necessary, angiotensin converting enzyme, is only present in alveolar endothelial cells. So this reaction takes place in the alveolus, and then after formation of angiotensin 2, it enters into blood, and through blood it again goes to kidney and performs its action. Serotonin, which is again an attacoid, which has also got some role in immunological reactions, can be also metabolized to endothelial cells of alveolus. And some other substances like the cytokine, prostaglandin, prostacyclin, nitric oxide. These prostaglandin, prostacyclin and nitric oxide, all of them are vasodilators. That means they dilate the blood vessel, and they can be also synthesized and secreted by the alveolar endothelial cell. And there is also some fibrinolytic factor that act as a natural anticoagulants, that means they prevent the coagulation of blood, are also present in alveolar endothelial cell. Respiratory tract also helps to maintain the acid-base balance by altering the excretion of carbon dioxide. As the carbon dioxide is an acidic substance, if in instances the amount of carbon dioxide is increased into our body, it will increase the acidity of our body and decrease the pH. So in that case, the rate of respiration will be increased, and by increasing the excretion of carbon dioxide, it will again bring down the pH level to normal, and vice versa. That means if in any instance the carbon dioxide content is decreased into our body, the body will go into an alkaline state, which means there is increase of pH, and in that case the respiratory tract will decrease the rate of respiration, and that's how it will again bring down the pH to a normal level. This is the contribution of respiratory system to the maintenance of acid-base balance. And it also can act as a volume reservoir of blood, because it contains almost 450 ml of blood among the 5 liter of total blood in our body. and it also helps in maintenance of temperature by exhalation of air. We have previously described that the inspired air that we inspire from environment uh, must have to be warmed before it enters into lower respiratory tract, and this warming process takes place by addition of heat from our internal body. So when we exhale this air, this heat from our body is also lost with this air. So that's how the respiratory tract performs its action in the maintenance of temperature. If the rate of exhalation of air is increased, which takes place during the summer region, uh, on the summer season of the year, the rate of temperature loss will also increase, and if instance if the rate of respiration is decreased, the loss of temperature from our body will also be decreased. It also has got some role in water balance, because in previous slide I have already mentioned that the inspired air must be humidified before it can enter into the lower respiratory tract. So in this humidification process, we are adding water content to the inspired air from our body. So when we are exhaling this air, the water content is also lost from our body, and this loss of water is called insensible water loss, because we are not aware of this water loss, it doesn't come into our senses. So this is called insensible water loss, which will be later discussed in the context of hypothalamus. So that's how it plays it performs its function in the water balance by increasing or decreasing the rate of exhalation of air. Now this is an elaboration of the types and functions of the dead space. We already know that what is a dead space, right? Dead space means the conducting zone where the only the conduction of air is taking place but no gaseous exchange. Uh, so this is called dead space. Uh, this dead space can be of two types: anatomical dead space and physiological dead space. Before going to the types of the dead space or description, there may come a question into your mind that why no gaseous exchange takes place in this conducting zone, as they also contain the air. They also could have contributed in respiration. They cannot contribute to respiration because there is no blood supply here. For gaseous exchange itself means the exchange of gaseous content, that is oxygen that will enter from alveolar air to the blood, and the carbon dioxide that will enter from blood to the alveolus, and for that purpose there must have the supply of blood, but this is not present in the conducting zone, so there cannot be any gaseous exchange or respiration in the conducting zones, and that's why this air is called dead space air. And this dead space can be of two types: anatomical dead space and physiological dead space. The total amount of air in the upper respiratory tract on the conducting portion of respiratory system is called the anatomical dead space. It is about 150 ml of air. We inspire normally 500 ml of air in each normal breath, that is called the tidal volume, which will be later discussed, and in this 500 ml of air, 150 ml of air always remains in the conducting zone, that cannot take place in the respiration, and that is called dead space air. And the importance of this portion or this air has already been discussed. That is the conditioning of air, that means filtration of air from various microparticles and warming and humidification of inspired air. And we can measure this anatomical dead space by single breath nitrogen test. Now the physiological dead space. Physiological dead space means anatomical dead space plus alveolar dead space. So when there will be a dead space in the alveolus, because normally the alveolus are all of them are active, that means respiration or gaseous exchange is taking place in the alveolus, so there is no question of alveolar dead space in a normal person. So in a normal person, anatomical dead space and alveolar physiological dead space will be always equal, because there is no alveolar dead space here. But if in some diseased conditions some alveolus become non-functional, that means they cannot perform their role in the gaseous exchange. In that condition there will be creation of an alveolar dead space. So in that condition the summation of anatomical plus alveolar dead space, that means the physiological dead space will exceed the anatomical dead space. So this is the clinical importance. When a physiological dead space exceeds the anatomical dead space, that it definitely means there is some creation of alveolar dead space. That means some of the alveolus are non-functional. So there is definitely a disease present in the body. So this is called this is the importance of physiological dead space, and it can be measured by Bohr's equation. Now, the respiration, the main function of respiratory tract, it's a physiological process by which oxygen is being transported from atmosphere to the cells for oxidation of ingested food materials, and carbon dioxide is eliminated from cells to atmosphere. We all know that the body cannot utilize the glucose, protein, or fat in their original form. They only can utilize the ATP, that is the adenosine triphosphate. So this is the primary source of energy. So any type of food that we consume must have to go through a series of metabolic reactions to ultimately produce ATP, and the reaction through which this ATP is generated is called for most of the cell it is produced with the help of oxygen in the mitochondria. So this is called oxidative phosphorylation. So whenever this oxidative phosphorylation is taking place with the help of oxygen that we inhale during inspiration, there is also production of carbon dioxide and water. Water it is utilized in our body, and carbon dioxide is not necessary for our body, it must have to be eliminated. So this process of inhalation of air to get the oxygen and then elimination of carbon dioxide in a whole is called respiration. Now, this respiration can be of two types: external respiration and internal respiration. The absorption of oxygen and elimination of carbon dioxide as a whole is known as external respiration, and internal respiration means the actual utilization of that oxygen that we inspire during inhalation, and then production of carbon dioxide and the gaseous exchange between the cells and their fluid medium. Because this is taking place completely internally in the cell, this is called internal respiration. These are the muscles that is required for the respirations. The inspiratory muscle respiration can be of two types: quiet and forceful. Quiet means the respiration that we are not aware of, that is taking place every seconds, every minutes. We are not even aware of this. This is called quiet inspiration or quiet expiration, quiet respiration as a whole. And for this quiet inspiration, we need the diaphragm, which will increase the vertical diameter of the chest cavity, and external intercostal muscle. The direction of these muscles, they are attached to our ribs, and the direction is forward and downward. So whenever they will be contracted, they will elevate the rib because they will pull the rib forward and downward. So that's how they will increase the anterior posterior diameter of the rib cage or the chest cavity. In forceful inspiration, in any instances we need extra oxygen because our metabolic demand is increased, such as in case of exercise. Okay, if any condition, exercise, fever, any condition, if the metabolic demand is increased, so there will be increased requirement of oxygen, so there will be increased requirement of rate of respiration. So in that condition we cannot fill up the fulfill the demand of our body by quiet respiration. So in that condition the respiration must has to be take place forcefully, and in that forceful respiration, in forceful inspiration, these muscles are also required alongside with the muscles that are required in quiet inspiration, that is the diaphragm and external intercostal. We also need the sternocleidomastoid, which will lift the sternum upward, scalene, which will lift the first two ribs, and anterior serratii, which will lift other ribs, which will lift the other ribs, and that's how they will all help in increase of the diameter of the chest cavity. Now comes to the muscle that are required in expiration. This is an interesting fact, that is, if we are expiring the air quietly, that is in the normal condition, we do not need any muscle for it. It will only take place by the elastic recoil tendency of lung. The lung is consists of various alveoli, and these all alveoli are elastic in nature, and they all elastic substances have a tendency to go back their natural position, or the position they were in before contraction. So this is called elastic recoil tendency, because they have the tendency to recoil, and this tendency is present in them because they are elastic structure. So this tendency is called elastic recoil tendency, and this elastic recoil tendency itself is sufficient for quiet expiration, that means to expire air quietly. So no muscle will be required here, and as the quiet expiration doesn't require any muscle, it is called a passive process, because there is no actual action is taking place here. There is action in the context of contraction of muscle. So the quiet expiration is called a passive process, while the quiet inspiration is an active process, because it requires contraction of muscles. But if we have inspired air forcefully, that means the increased amount of oxygen has entered into our body, so there is increased metabolism, so there will be increased production of carbon dioxide. So this increased amount of carbon dioxide, to exhale them we need forceful expiration, and in that forceful expiration there is the contraction of muscle is a must, and here we need the internal intercostal. They are also attached to the ribs, but their position is just opposite to the external intercostal. That means they are directed backward and upward, so when they will contract, they will decrease the anteroposterior diameter of the chest, because they will pull the chest cavity backward. And the most important muscle for forceful expiration is abdominal recti, or rectus abdominis. It pulls down the lower two ribs and compresses the abdominal contents upwards, so it pushes the diaphragm to upwards, and that's how it decreases the vertical diameter of the chest. This is a diagram showing the position of the inspiratory and expiratory muscle. You can see here. This is the internal intercostal muscle. Internal intercostal muscle, just take a look at it. Its direction is downwards and forwards. So when it will contract during inspiration, it will push the chest cavity to forward, so it will increase the anterior posterior diameter of the chest. And the external intercostal muscles, its direction is just the opposite of internal intercostal muscles, its direction is just opposite to external intercostal muscle. That means it is directed backward and upward. So when it is contracted during expiration, it will pull the chest cavity to inside, so it will decrease the anterior posterior diameter of the chest. And this is the rectus abdominis, which is a muscle required for forceful expiration. When it contracts, it compresses the abdominal contents, so it pushes the diaphragm. This is the diaphragm. It is not this is the diaphragm. So when this rectus abdominis pushes the diaphragm to upward, diaphragm goes upwards, and it decreases the vertical diameter of the chest. So we can actually see here during through this picture. This is a picture showing the inspiration, or the condition of different muscles during inspiration. The external intercostal muscle is contracted, and diaphragm is also contracted. So when the diaphragm contracts, it goes downwards, so it gives a space for the chest cavity, so there is an increase in the vertical diameter of the chest. While during expiration, when the rectus abdominis muscle is contracted, it pushes the diaphragm to upward, and the diaphragm goes upward and decrease the vertical diameter of the chest. And in the context of intercostal muscle, when during inspiration the external intercostal muscle is contracted, it as the direction of this muscle is downward and forward, it pushes the chest cavity uh, in front, so it increases the anterior posterior diameter of the chest. But when during expiration the internal intercostal muscles are contracted, which direction is backward and upward, it decreases the anterior posterior diameter of the chest, so there is a decrease in the anterior posterior diameter of the chest. So we are talking about basically the forceful inspiration and expiration here. Now we will again go back to the basic mechanism of respiration, that is actually the basic mechanism of quiet respiration. So first come the inspiration. It's an active process because the muscle contraction takes place here. So for this quiet expiration to take place, the signal from respiratory center, we have got various types of respiratory center, which will be later discussed in the context of respiratory center and regulation of respiration. So among the three types of respiratory center, the dorsal respiratory center and the prooprogenitor complex, which contains some pacemaker cell, that means they can generate action potential without any external stimulus from exterior. This prooprogenitor complex and dorsal respiratory group of neuron which are present in the medulla, they are responsible for the inspiration. When they send signal, the signal will pass down to sorry, diaphragm via the phrenic nerve, and also to external intercostal muscle by the intercostal nerve, and the diaphragm will contract and goes down, and it will increase the vertical diameter of chest. And when the external intercostal muscle contracts, it increases the anterior posterior and transverse diameter of chest. So there is expansion of the chest wall and increased diameter of the chest wall. So when there is an increase in the space, so there will be also increase in the volume of the interthoracic volume. So whenever the space is increased, the pressure will be automatically decreased, and the interpleural pressure, that means the pressure that is present between the two layers of pleura. We all know from our anatomy that we have got two layers of pleura. One is called the visceral pleura, that is closely attached to the alveoli, and another is attached to the inner surface of the chest cavity, that is called parietal pleura. So in between this parietal and visceral pleura, that is the space is called interpleural space, and the pressure in this space is called interpleural pressure. So normally the interpleural pressure is minus 5 centimeter of water or minus 2.5 millimeter of mercury. Whenever the space interthoracic space is increased, the pressure will be always automatically decreased from minus 5 centimeter of water to minus 7 centimeter of water, or to from minus 2.5 millimeter mercury to minus 6 millimeter of mercury. And as the pressure is decreased, the lung has got the chance to be expanded, so expansion of lungs or alveoli will occur. As there is expansion of alveoli, there is also increase in the alveolar space, which will decrease the intra-alveolar pressure from 0 to minus 1 centimeter of water, or from 0 to minus 1 millimeter of mercury. Here the 0 doesn't necessarily means the mathematical 0. Here by 0 we means that there is no difference between the intra-alveolar pressure and the atmospheric pressure in normal condition, when there is no respiration is taking place. The normal atmospheric pressure is 756 millimeter of mercury. So in normal condition, when there is no respiration is taking place, there is no difference between the intra-alveolar pressure and the atmospheric pressure, so that is referred by the 0, no difference. But whenever there is an inspiration, the alveolar pressure must have to be decreased from the atmospheric pressure for the air to enter from atmosphere to alveoli, because air, whether it's air or fluid or gaseous substance, it must have to come from a higher pressure area to a lower pressure area. As in this case, alveolar pressure is decreased from atmospheric pressure. Air will enter from atmosphere or environment to alveoli, and that's how inspiration will takes place. And during quiet expiration, there is no requirement of muscle contraction because the lung elastic recoil tendency is enough for this to happen. And when it will happen, the respiratory signal actually comes from the dorsal respiratory group of neuron for 3 seconds. Then it will ceases. This signal will be ceased for next 2 seconds, and when this signal is not coming from the respiratory center, inspiratory center, the muscles will go again into their previous states. That means the diaphragm, which was previously contracted during the process of inspiration because of the signal coming from the dorsal respiratory group of neuron, as there is no signal now, so it will be relaxed and will go upward and will decrease the vertical diameter of the chest, and there will be also relaxation of external intercostal muscle, so it pull back the ribs, or it will decrease the anteroposterior diameter of the chest cavity, and that will compress the alveoli, and for their elastic recoil tendency they will again go back to their uh, natural position, and the alveolar pressure will again increase, uh, and that's how the air will flows out from the lungs. There is a there is an error. It will be actually +1. So in that condition, +1 means now the alveolar pressure is increased from the atmospheric pressure. How much increase? +1. That means if the atmospheric pressure is 756 millimeter of mercury, the alveolar pressure during quiet expiration will be 751 millimeter of mercury. Okay, there will be +1 difference. As the air always goes out from the high pressure area to low pressure area, and in that context, instance, the air will go out of the alveoli to the environment, and expiration will takes place. So for now, this is all. The next part of the presentation will be presented in the next video. Thank you all.